It feels like ultra runners are pursuing ever increasing distances, and this should not be surprising to anybody who knows us. Like if you did one thing, then you obviously want to do the next thing. And there's a few ways to do that. You either get faster or you go farther. And so now we have multiple 200 plus mile races per year. Well, this week on the podcast, I have Tony Klein. He is currently in the middle of the Triple Crown of 200s from Destination Races. And this was recorded after he successfully completed the Tahoe 200, but before he went to go on to the Bigfoot 200. As I'm saying this intro, Tony is out somewhere in the middle of the woods in the Pacific Northwest trying to run another 200 miles 2 weeks after he ran 200 at Tahoe. So if you are interested in these long races, this is a great interview to listen to. Tony's a great guy. It was a super fun conversation, and he has a different insight than I've heard in the past on how these races are and how they go and how you might train for them. So if you're interested in these really long distances, you will get a lot out of this interview. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. This week on the podcast, we have Tony Klein. He is currently in the middle of trying to run the Triple Crown of 200s and wanted to get him on kind of midway through that. And then hopefully we'll be able to get him back on at the end and kind of see how it went and how perspectives change through it. But Tony, thanks for coming on, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. So I've been running since 2011, but really kind of lucked into it, stumbled into it, and really found that I really like trail running and I really like the long distance Sufferfest. And so I've really found myself attracted to the 200-mile distance. 100 miles is one sport, and the 200-mile is really a completely different sport.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that, man. So like I looked you up on Ultra Sign Up as I try to before, doing these things. And I mean, any ultra has a lot of ultras, but you do not have necessarily the like background I usually see from someone who's trying to go for a triple count of 200s. So I guess like I was gonna ask this later, but what drew you to that distance? Like you said that you enjoyed the Sufferfest, and yeah, why? It's
Yeah.
really far, man. Yeah, why?
It's interesting because I find a lot of the people that you talk to in these long distance, and this is even at the 100-mile distance, but I feel like it's even more true. The people that do multiple 200-mile races, they all have some background of suffering. So they've all either had, not all, but a good majority have. They're either gone through some medical issues. They are recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. There's something that they're just used to being in a dark space and then coming out the other side. And we talked a little bit when we first got on in the pre-show that I had some health issues, and it wasn't anything super major. I have celiac, so I have to eat gluten-free. And but when that goes misdiagnosed for a long time, your body starts shutting down, different organs start shutting down. And so there was a period of about 6 to 8 months that I was out of the office more than I was in. And I really had a hard time working. And during that time, it was even just, life was breath by breath at that point, just really trying to figure out how to get through that. And so, yeah. So when you start looking at these longer distances, you start realizing that, I heard Courtney Dauwalter one time say that the race doesn't start until the wheels fall off, and the wheels fall off for everybody. So it's really more about what do you do when they fall off? How fast can you get back on track?
For sure.
And for me, ultra running at this longer distance is more about problem solving than it is about actual running, because you do power hike or walk, a good portion of it, and then you run what makes sense to run, and it's all about getting there as fast as you can. But I just found that I have this skill set of going to dark places and being able to suffer through it and coming out the other side. And the more you were talking about my ultra sign up, I ran my first marathon in 2014, and it was going to be a one and done. And then somebody brought up doing another one in 2015. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll join you guys. There was a few people doing it. And then 2017, I did my first 50 miler. 2019 did my first 100 miler. And then 2020, I think I did my first 200 miler. And I have this saying that I tell myself is, one does not find your limits until you search for them. And the more you search, the harder they are to find.
Yeah.
And so I'm just searching for my limits.
Like that, man. So a couple things in there probably need to clarify. For people who don't know, what is celiac disease?
Yeah, so it's an autoimmune disease where your body just rejects and attacks itself in your intestines and your digestive system. So you can be eating a lot of food, but the body attacks itself. It's sort of like dropping a match in a forest. Sometimes it'll burn the forest down, and sometimes it doesn't do anything. So the reactions are different, and they're different for everybody. But essentially, your body winds up starving itself to death, and people die from it if they don't get it figured out, because you're just not getting any nutrients to keep your body going. And so that's what it is. But once, it's an easy fix. It takes about 2 years for your intestines to heal. But once you do that, you just need to eat gluten-free, and you can have a pretty normal life.
Well, I'm glad you're out of it, man. Yeah, I've known a few people with celiac, and it's really rough. And it always seems to take a while to dial in. And during the period of like figuring out what's going on and exactly what's wrong and why they're just so tired all the time, like, it just looked, the two people I know who were like, I knew them before and after they were diagnosed, and the searching period was just suffering. It was a lot. So I'm kind of glad I'm glad you're out of that, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah,
one of the other things people don't think about with that is that a lot of society, a lot of things that we do with other people revolve around food and alcohol, or just social events. And so not only are you going through this thing where you're not feeling well, but you also, once you get diagnosed, you start to go through this little mini depression of, my life's not the same. I can't go socialize. And so it really puts you in a spot where you really have to evaluate what's important. And it changes. I mean, again, I don't want to sound selfish. There are a lot of people that have it a lot worse than celiac, but it does change your life and your habits and your routines and all of that.
Yeah, and all that's really hard, man. I mean, that's one of the main reasons, like, it's really hard to get off drugs. I mean, it sucks to, obviously get off drugs, but it also, you have to change your entire environment. And it's like, anytime you have to change your environment, it's a chore at the least, right? Like,
Sure.
Absolutely. So you got through that, like, you got into running. We talked a little bit about this before, but like, what got you started running as a result of like this health struggle you had?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned that this all happened, the celiac diagnosis happened in 2006. And back then, there wasn't this massive wave of gluten-free offerings. I think the food distributors, manufacturers, restaurants, they figured out that they can actually charge more for this. And it sort of became a fad, which I'm a little concerned with, because when the next fad comes along, what happens with the gluten-free availability. But we kind of got through that. And then in 2011, I started sliding backwards a little bit, started getting sick again. And so kind of preemptively, I went to the doctor and said, I'm not feeling great. And they ran a bunch of tests and they said, well, we don't really know what's wrong with you. Maybe you just need more exercise. And I was working a lot. I was taking my laptop to bed. I was working on contracts in the middle of the night and, things like this, just really not having a great work-life balance, which, that's not my favorite term, but it's true. I was not treating
Yeah.
myself well. And I got the results from the test and the doctor said, well, again, we don't really know what's wrong with you. Maybe you need more exercise. So I just, out of spite more than anything else, I'm like, I'm going to check that box. And so there's this park by my house. It's a 0.6 of a mile loop around this park. And I just started walking it in the mornings. And, I wasn't a morning person. I wasn't an exercise person. Like that was my max exercise, was doing like, now forget doing a mile. It was just, can I get around this park, and I started enjoying it. I started listening to the birds sing and watching the sunrises and, smelling the grass in the morning and just the flowers. And it was just became nice. And so I started like taking the trail, and I'd get to where the trail was about to turn, and then I'd turn around. So it gave me some incentive to go back next time to see what was around the bend. And one morning I walked 8 miles before work and realized it was great, but it was taking a lot of time. So the next day I decided I would get up and run 5 minutes, walk 5, run 4, walk 4, run 3, and all the way down to 1. And that was my full workout. And I feel like I kind of lucked into running because nobody called me up and said, hey, you're out of shape. I think you should come exercise with me. And we're going to do 3 miles at an 8-minute pace. Because I would have hated that. And I probably would have dropped out and, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
I think that's why so many people hate it, man, because that's exactly what they do, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you can walk a little faster, and then you can decide to run a couple steps. And then, if you just keep it enjoyable, like all of a sudden you're doing things you never imagined.
100%. And actually, I just like finished writing an email about like you should enjoy your training, not like necessarily all of it, but most of it. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna spend so much time on it, man. Like if you're spending a lot of time on the stuff, something you really dislike or don't enjoy, like maybe we need to reevaluate some things a little bit. So yeah, that makes a
Sure.
ton of sense to me.
Yeah.
So on that front, like we got started running, just kept adding, which is beautiful. It's like this very natural, like kind of run walkie method of things that we often have to talk people into. So I think that's really cool that that's just how you did it. And then a few years later, many years later, whatever, you're running this triple crown of 200s and just did Tahoe. How was Tahoe?
So this is the first race of 3 200 plus mile distances. The next one is in just a few days. With the record snowfall they had at Tahoe this year, they with some permitting issues and things, they wound up bumping it back from June into July. So it's going to be interesting to see how Bigfoot is up in Washington State. But Tahoe was actually a really good experience for me. I learned a lot. I learned some things that I probably should have learned previously, but you take the lessons as they come. And
that's all you can do, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the first day was super hot. There was a lot of carnage the first day. A lot of people went out way too fast. I feel like my pace was good that first day, but
and when you say that, sorry, but when you say that your pace was good for something like 200 miles, like what does that even mean? Like, yeah, what is that?
Yeah. So the importance of having a good coach. And one of the things that I picked up along the way is that you can run these 200 milers if you can find your forever pace. Like just what pace can you run at forever, which is going to be way slower than you would run a 50 miler at, or even a 100 miler.
Sure.
And part of that is you're going to be taking breaks. You're going to stop at the aid station. Like these aid stations are like full buffets. Like what do you want? You want cheeseburgers? You want scrambled eggs? You want, potatoes, whatever. Like they're going to grill up whatever you need. So if you can find your forever pace, which is, a 12 to 14 minute pace, and then you're going to take a couple of hours to sleep, and, so that lengthens it, but you're not like trying to go all out redlining it for as long as you can and then figuring it out. Like you got to find your forever pace that you could just run forever at.
That makes sense. And I feel like I was just having this conversation with somebody about 100, where we often talk about like banking miles early or banking time or something like that. And I feel like that's misdirected. And instead we should almost be like banking energy. Like people are so successful with something like a 4-1 run walk strategy to get under sub 24 in a 100-miler. And it's because you're banking energy. And like it's exactly kind of what you're talking about here, where if we can find that forever pace and keep our reserves higher earlier, you're going to be much better off when it's like, what's a 200 take? 3 days, like 3 days down the line.
Yeah. And but the thing that, and I knew about the forever pace, finding your forever pace, but it was so hot that first day and a lot of people dropped out. I think there were 209 starters and 110 finishers. So I think 99 people, I guess, if that's the math, actually wound up they either dropped out or they timed out because of not meeting some earlier cutoffs. But one of the things that really clicked for me this race is you can run your forever pace, but if you're not fueling your forever fuel or hydrating for your forever pace, like that's where you get into trouble. And I'm a pretty heavy sweater. And I got to the point where I wasn't sweating at all. Like I could touch my shirt and it was totally dry. And so we spent some time in the aid stations trying to figure that out.
Good, man. I mean, yeah, that's such a big thing. If you can't stay hydrated, like you're just done. So yeah, I'm glad you like took the time you needed and I'm assuming you had people with you pacing and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so you could pick up a pacer after like mile 60 or something like that, somewhere in there. And so from that point, for most of it, I had a pacer with me. Now, you know this, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know it, but from the first step, when you're running a 200 miler or even a 100 miler, you're running at a calorie deficit. You can't consume the same amount of calories that you're burning. And so to manage your calories and your electrolytes and your hydration and your pace and your core temperature, and then in a 200, you add in sleep as well, managing your sleep. You're just constantly juggling. I definitely
want to talk to you about that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like what to you seems to take priority, or just this like constantly revolving wheel of like trying to get all this stuff to fit into your head? I mean, especially as you get more and more tired, like I'm probably going to ask you this question later as part of something else, but like, how does it all fit? Like, how do you make all of the stuff fit during the race when you're getting increasingly more and more fatigued? Hey everyone, I've decided to stop doing ads for this podcast, at least for the time being. I just don't think they're a good use of anybody's time. So instead of that, I just have a simple ask. If you find this information valuable, please tell someone about it. Either hit the like or subscribe buttons on your preferred platform, share it with somebody, or you could even just head over to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, and I'd appreciate that as well. I'm just trying to make more good, free information for people so we can all get better at running on the trails. And if we can spread the tribe, that would be great. Thank you, and let's get to the podcast. Like, how do you make all of the stuff fit during the race when you're getting increasingly more and more fatigued?
That's a great question. And if I had the answer to that, like the perfect solution, I'd be a lot faster, have a lot better finish times. But I think one of the, you have a lot of time to think out there. So I always come up with these like, my number one thing to finish an ultra is X, and then I come up with another number one thing to finish an ultra. But truly, one of the things I tell myself when I'm out there, because it's going to get dark and you are going to suffer, and there's going to be times you're questioning why I'm doing it, and you have to have a pretty strong why as to why you're doing it. But I repeatedly tell myself that ultra running is more about problem solving than it is about running. And if I can remember that, then when I know that one of these things, one of these core categories starts to go off track, I can say, okay, well, my pace is good, but the temperature is too high. And so I went through more water than I thought I was going to. Yes, I had my bladder full of water, but now it's empty, and then I went through all those. So now I got to make sure I'm taking my electrolytes. Am I taking it in a powder form or a pill form, or, it's a lot to manage. And early in the race, you've got more wits about you to figure it out. But later in the race, when you're fatigued, like at Moab 2 years ago, I had food in the back of my pack, but I was so exhausted, I just didn't want to take my pack off to get it, to eat it. And it was just, it really set me back because I needed those calories. But so it's nice to have a pacer with you that can take over your thinking and, tell you when to eat, when to drink, watch your pace, tell you if you should take a trail nap, or at least ask you to, or ask you if you want to.
Yeah. I feel like a pacer functioning as your, I don't know, second brain is probably pretty useful in something like this.
Yeah.
So when you're out there, like talking about trail naps, one of the biggest questions when it comes to 200s is the sleep thing. So like, you've done a couple of them, you're planning to do a couple more, like maybe you haven't perfectly figured it out yet, and let me know, but like, what is your sleep strategy? What have you found works? What have you seen works for other people? Like if someone's considering a 200 and the sleep question is definitely a real one, what should be some considerations, and like how to do that well?
Sure. Going into Tahoe, I was telling myself that sleep is the number one variable, that if you get that figured out, you'll have a good race. And the reason I said that was last year at the Moab 240, I feel like my sleep strategy was almost as good as you can get. I made some mistakes around mile 200 to 215. I should have taken a trail nap a little bit sooner, and I kind of stretched that. But
sure. Sorry, I'm giggling because that's just like I made mistakes at 200 mile 200. It's like you're already so far. Anyway, yeah, okay,
yeah. But my sleep strategy going into that race, and I use the same thing going into Tahoe. I don't drink a lot of caffeine. Like I don't drink soda. I don't drink coffee. Every once in a while I'll have a chai tea or something, but pretty rarely. So for me, I didn't have to cut down on caffeine going into the race. But if you are drinking a lot of coffee, I'd suggest a couple of weeks, tailoring that back, really eliminating if you can, cutting it back so that way the whole first day you don't take any caffeine, not in a gel, not in a pill, not drinking a soda. And so that way you run a whole first day. And then when it gets to be night and you start to get exhausted, you can go into a good recharging sleep. And then when you wake up, like from that point on, I'm taking gels with caffeine. I'm really using that as a boost to get me through that night, that first night, or if I was able to run through that first night, it carries me forward through that first full or second full day.
Makes sense. And I mean, I know I'm sitting here like drinking my coffee, but yeah, that makes it makes a ton of sense to me. Like it only takes about 2 weeks to like resensitize yourself to it. If you just, I mean, it sucks if you drink a lot of it and cut it cold turkey, like expect a headache. So maybe consider tapering. But yeah, if you can resensitize yourself to it, you will immediately remember that it is in fact a drug. Like it's very motivating for sure. Yeah. So that tracks.
And then on the trails, there are aid stations that are designated as sleep stations. where they have like tents and cots and wool blankets and things like that. You can pretty much sleep at, they'll have a cot or two at all the aid stations, but some of them have like legitimate places where you can go inside a tent and sleep. And I've had some success with that. The challenges with those is they're at an aid station and people are coming in, especially later in the race after you're able to pick up a pacer or meet crew. People are ringing cowbells and, cheering for their runner when they're coming in. So,
Sure,
definitely
that
have
makes sense.
earplugs, but
Yeah.
I've had just as much success taking shorter naps. So I'll do like a half hour to an hour and a half at a sleep
Okay.
station, just depending on how long I can stay there. But on the trail naps, I'll do anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, just passing out on the side of the trail.
And are you generally a person that like can nap in the middle of the day, or is this like a very specific circumstance for you?
Um, I mean, I'm not a big napper. Um, I think for me, when you're out there, the only time you would really lay down on the side of the trail is if your pace is just, it's hard to wrap your mind around it when you're out there. But when you're going up a hill and you're doing an 18 or 20-minute mile because you're just dragging and you're tired,
Sure.
um, if you slept for 20 minutes on the side of the road, you could get up and cut that down to maybe like a 14-minute mile or whatever. And it only takes you 2.5 miles to recover the time you lost. Plus now you've got this burst of energy.
I like
And
that. That makes sense.
there was one
Yeah.
time 2 years ago, two Moabs ago, I was super tired. It was about mile, probably 160, 170, something like that. And I was just super tired. And I kept begging my pacer. I'm like, I just need a nap. And he's like, no, it's not safe here. It's cold. We're on the ledge where it's windy.
Okay.
And I'm like, I just need 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. And, I don't know how long this went on. It could have been, it could have been 2 minutes, but it felt like we were debating back and forth for a half hour or whatever. And so finally he's like, okay, right here. He's like, you got 2 minutes. And I promise you this is true. He starts the alarm on his phone. He starts the 2-minute countdown. I laid down on the side of the trail, immediately fell asleep, had a dream about my son posting something on TikTok, having it go viral, and woke up before the 2 minutes was over. And I was ready to go. And it gave me a boost for like 40 minutes till I could get to the next aid station.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. I when you say that you fell asleep immediately, is that just because you're so tired, or is that a thing that like kind of fits for your general life as well? Like if you tend to be a pretty decent sleeper, like
No, I mean, this was like I
okay.
was doing the whole death march. Like we were going up a hill and I'd stop and lean over my poles and my eyes would start to
Oh,
shut.
dude.
So like
Yeah.
I was to the point of extreme fatigue. And so
Sure.
there was no laying on the ground and feeling like pine needles poking me or rocks sticking me. It was just like, I'm out of gas. I need to recharge.
Good man. Yeah, I asked because like for me, I'm not like naps don't make my life better ever. But I've also been like that kind of tired, like up 2 days, a bunch of like practices for sports, that kind of thing in college. And I'm just like, as soon as I hit the bed, I'm out. Um, and then I could imagine if you're that tired, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, but that's kind of why I ask because I know some people are just like, I'm not really a nap person, but I think when you're that exhausted, it just doesn't matter at all.
There was a section again. I know we started talking about Tahoe and I kind of veered off, but last year at Moab there was a stretch of road that is a paved road and it's pretty remote. And so I had my pacer. We were walking in the middle of the road, and I mean, when I say pretty remote, I don't think I saw more than two cars in 15 miles, and probably, I mean, and that's what 4 hours or whatever it was.
Sure.
Um, and so he, for a stretch of time, he walked down the middle of the road, and I could picture where he was. He was like 5 or 6 steps in front of me, like 2 steps over to the right. And I just closed my eyes and for probably 20 minutes, just let my eyes rest while I was following his footsteps and just listening to it. And your mind, you just get so tired. You're doing whatever you can. And again, I probably should have just laid down on the side of the road for 10, 20 minutes and then got up and ran that instead of doing the desk march. But your brain stops working at some point.
Yeah, it has to. There's no way. That makes sense. I mean, one thing I saw from you on the internet was a dip in a lake, it looked like at
Yeah.
Tahoe. That looked invigorating based on the winter that I know everyone had. I assume that was cold. Like, how was that? Did that seem to help?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. That was probably like mile 160. I don't know the exact mileage, but we were
Yeah,
into the race pretty well. We were in
yeah.
it pretty well. And I had a blister that was forming on my left pinky toe, and it got to the point where, and this is pretty
Sorry, I saw
gross. You
the
can
I
you
saw the video. It looked rough, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can cut this if you want, but it basically, it reminded me, it lifted the nail on my pinky toe, so it kind of, the nail
Cool.
reminded me of like a
Yeah,
yolk inside of an egg, and
for
it was just kind
sure.
of floating
Yeah.
inside the blister. And I told Brandon, my pacer, I'm like, I really feel like I need to pop this. And he's like, well, let's just keep going until we get to the aid station. And there are just certain times where you just need to change your mindset. And I'm like, I know we're going to be running past the lake. Like, I just want to stop, sit on a rock, I'll pop it. And I just want to kind of do that in an area that's, I don't know, brings me a little peace. So we get up there
Fair.
and I see this lake that is just beautiful and it's nice and calm. And I just decide, okay, well, I'm taking off my shoes and socks and we're going to pop this blister. But you know what? I'm taking off my shirt and shorts too, or shirt and shorts. And I spent like 15 minutes just swimming in the lake, just recharging, letting that cool my body down,
Sure.
resetting my mindset. And then we got out and dealt with the blister. But yeah, sometimes I think on these long runs, you're doing whatever you can to just keep your head right and your mindset right. And I was to the point that foot hurt pretty bad. It's not like a broken leg, but a blister after 160 miles can be a little irritating.
I don't know. I think most of us who are hearing this have had blisters. There's a special like kind of pain to it. Like it's sending the same signals that you're on fire. Like that's the brain
Yeah.
signals you're getting, right? So like that sucks. Like you're basically being told you're burning alive, at least part of your body. So yeah, man, it's a particular kind of unpleasantness.
Yeah.
Especially when you have, I mean, I realize you're 160 into it, but that means you still have like 40 miles plus to go. So yeah,
Yeah.
that sucks. When you are making a decision to get into a lake for 15 minutes, this deep into a race, I don't know how close you were to cutoffs, but like, is that a thing you have to weigh with time? Like, is this something tight? Is this just like, I don't care. I'm not gonna, like, if I don't do this, I'm not gonna do well. So like, this is the thing that has to happen. Like, how does that mental calculus go? Oh, and
Yeah.
was your pacer on the side like, we don't have time for this? Like, how does all that weigh in?
Yeah. We've been running together for a long time. We actually trained together, and so we'll pace each other. So we know each other's personality, and I think he knew at that moment that's, even though he didn't necessarily agree with it, and he told me it's not something that he would do at the time. He knew I had to do it. We were when we went out to initially, when I signed up for the Triple Crown, I had this vision of really doing well and just seeing what my body was capable of. And is it possible that I could podium for the Triple Crown? Because for those of you that don't know, the Triple Crown, you run all three of these races and then they combine your time. And then whoever has the fastest combined time for all three races wins the Triple Crown.
Cool.
And so when I signed up, I was like really focused on, I kind of want to win it. I kind of want to like podium. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not really
I like
qualified
that.
to win it. If I list the 20 people that are ahead of me, like I have no business even thinking I'm going to come in at the top 20, but um, it's kind of a cool goal. Let me see what I can do.
Yeah,
And
man.
the closer I got to it, the more pressure it was putting on me to really like, it became not fun anymore. And
I was
so,
just gonna ask that, like, if that was like kind of taking the joy out of it.
yeah, it did. And so I was talking with my coach and we were talking about the fact that I still want to go out and have my best race. And that's all I can control. I can't control everybody else. I can't control who's going to come in before or after me. And so at this point, I had been in like 15th place, which to place at the Triple Crown, not everybody runs all three races. So you're competing against people at Tahoe that may not actually be in the Triple Crown. They're just running
Sure.
one or two races. So, I don't need to like place top 5, top 10, whatever, necessarily to do well in the Triple Crown. But I was early in the race. I was battling back and forth for 15th and 16th place, which was pretty decent. Then we rested. Then I dropped back down after taking a rest at an aid station and dealing with some medical issues. And then we passed with one pacer, we passed 29 consecutive runners without anybody passing me. And then I passed with
And
another pacer, passed another 10 without anybody passing me. And that got me
how
back up into that.
how deep was this in? Like,
This was 140, 150 miles. So it was kind of right
yeah,
before
man,
the lake. And
that's big.
so, I
Cool.
was up there. And so when you talked about did this dip in the lake kind of put me back with cutoffs, I wasn't necessarily looking at the back end of the time frame and the cutoff. I was looking more
Sure.
of what is this doing placement wise. But I made a decision at that point. Like it took me back to I wanted to have a fun race. I wanted to do my best and not worry about where I placed. And so I just said, it's time to go swimming. It's time to recharge. And so that did put me back. I did lose some position there. And
Sure.
then I had a lighting issue later that night that kind of pushed me back. So I wound up finishing 209 starters, 110 finishers, and I finished 33rd. So still
Well,
respectable.
impressive, man. That's still really respectable. Yeah. That's awesome. Congrats.
Thanks. I will tell you,
So,
to wrap up the lake thing, I will tell you, um, I have a much better memory of the race because I took the time to do that and enjoy myself in the lake versus just powering through, popping the blister on the go, or not even popping it and waiting to the aid station. So, when you're doing these long distance things, sometimes it's just, we're out there to create memories and stuff. There's only one winner of the race, and I don't really care if that's me or not. I mean,
sure.
it's cool if it is,
I get
but I'm
that.
probably not going to be that guy.
Not wrong. Yeah. No, I think that perspective is really important to have, especially as we do these things. Like, there's not, I mean, even the professionals, there's not a lot of money in this sport. We do it because we enjoy it when you're doing it for whatever. So, like, if you're suffering the whole way, maybe take a minute to hop in a lake. I really like that advice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so if we look at one, you said you finished, you got 33rd. Congrats. Um, I know that Destination Races does this cool thing where they do like one of a kind buckles or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you choose and why?
Yeah. So, again, you can cut any of this that you want, so we can
It's
talk a little bit about it.
all
But
up to you, man.
I wound up having, because of the dehydration that first day, um, and not being able to sweat and all of that, I was really concerned. This wasn't just my one race for the year and then be done. This was the first of 650
Yeah.
some miles.
God, that's a lot.
And so I self-reported at one of the aid stations that I was having issues. So I self-reported, and so again, this might be too much information, but I wound up, they wanted to check the color of my urine, and so I wound up peeing in a cup, and
Sure.
it was a pretty bright reddish orange. It was different. I was
Okay.
expecting it to be like darker, like Coke, and they worry about rhabdo
That
and
was my first thought when you said you weren't
yeah,
sweating. Yeah.
yeah. So the first one was kind of I don't even know how to explain it. It was like the color of a cutie orange, but even maybe more red. It was
Okay.
weird.
Yeah,
Um,
and for clarity, like for most of the time, you'll hear rhabdo as being described kind of as brown and maybe a little thicker than you want it to be. Like I realize all this is gross, but this is a thing that if you want to run 200s, you should probably be aware of, and maybe even hundreds in heat, because like rhabdo will kill you. So this is a
yeah,
thing you should know. So that's awesome. Cool. Thank
yeah,
you for being open about it, because this matters. I occasionally, yearly, see someone in the hospital because they didn't do this stuff. So
sure.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So we stopped. So we stopped at the first aid station that I was having issues at. We did that color test, and then took some electrolytes and took a little bit of rest and carried on to the next one. Well, at the next aid station, it was brown. It was like a
Yeah.
dark brown, and so because I was kind of already on the radar, they were checking me at each aid station. So I probably spent an
Fair.
additional 6 hours at the aid stations dealing with waiting for me. And again, cut what you want, but I probably peed in a cup like 14 different times throughout the race and took a picture of it, showed it to the
That
medics so that
actually
they could.
that brings it warms my heart a little bit that they give that they care that much. That's really good. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad, because
Yeah.
these races are nightmarish. It can be, at least. So
Yeah.
I'm glad they have people there taking care of that aspect of it. That's awesome. Good.
Yeah. And you're, on these aid stations, some of them are 18 to 20 miles apart. So you get 4 or 5 miles in. If you start having kidney issues or something, there's not a lot of people coming to get you right away. So,
Yeah, and you're in the middle of nowhere.
mhm. Yeah. So we wound up getting through that, but that was one of the things that I really had to focus on, was making sure that I continued to run healthy. And we took a little extra time at the aid stations, but overall, like that was, destination trail, and all the volunteers and all the medics, like they did such a great job of just making sure I had what I needed, making sure I stayed till I was hydrated, and then we would
It's
leave
really
the aid
cool.
station from there.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was talking with her name's Mackenzie, and she did Bigfoot last year, and a while ago, like right after that, she and I chatted, and I ended up hanging out with her pacer for a while at a local race, and she is like one of the medics who works at a
Yeah,
station in
Dawn.
Moab. Dawn,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
love Dawn. She and I got along really well, and she was telling me about some of the med stuff down in Moab, and more about how the blister prevention was definitely terrible,
Yeah.
but we didn't
Yeah.
talk too much about rhabdo. So good, man.
Yeah.
It's really nice to hear that like it's that well covered. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well,
So
to wrap up, you asked me a
yeah,
question and I went down a rabbit hole. So the question
that's
about
what
the
this is all
buckle.
about, man. It's just conversation. So yeah, the buckle.
So the buckle. So at the end of the race, imagine running out there for 3.5 days, whatever, and your brain's pretty shot. And then they line up these 200 custom made, one of a kind buckles, and you have to, or you get to select like which one means the most to you. So um, it probably took me 20 minutes to pick the buckle that I picked, and I wound up picking. It's well, it's right up here. If you were watching it, but if you're just listening to it, it winds up. It's a nice light yellow color with some darker brown leaves, but it represented
Oh,
perfectly
that's
my
great.
journey of having having the appropriate hydration and things that I needed. So that one spoke to me.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate the story behind that because I saw the buckle on Facebook and I thought it was sweet. Like they always look cool when I see them. Um, but yeah, the story makes that so much better. That's great. So you got through this race. You did really well, actually. And did you learn anything that you're going to take into the next two? Like, how are you feeling about the next two? Because I don't know when you signed up for the Triple Crown, but like, yeah, this 2 week window that should be probably what 2 months is
Yeah.
a lot. So what are you learning? Like, are you doing anything for like speed recovery? And then like, what are we taking into like the next couple races you're doing? Like, how do you make all of the stuff fit during the race when you're getting increasingly more and more fatigued?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance. My watch continues to tell me that I'm detraining, and that's kind of irritating. But I have to balance really going out and trying to keep my cardio up,
Yeah,
while at the same time letting my legs and everything else recover. I'm still,
sure.
the fatigue level for a race like this. I mean, you're pretty wiped out for that next week,
I bet,
and
man.
so you're just now kind of getting to the point, or I'm just now, the race was over on the 25th. It's what is the 4th, so even
Week and a
that
half,
long
two
into
weeks.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, um I'm still pretty tired. So most of my recovery is just making sure I'm eating a lot of protein, recovering. I'm still taking electrolytes. I mean, I'm drinking Tailwind like it's, lemonade, just to try to get that recovered.
And
Um, and then foot care, I had a couple of blisters that
sure.
I needed to take care of. Overall, outside of that one blister, my feet are actually look pretty good. I lost a couple toenails more than normal, but that was because it was so hot. And then
Yeah.
there's a section called Power Line, and it's really steep going up and coming down.
Yeah.
And because of all the
It's
water, there was a lot of
notorious.
runoff.
Hmm.
And so my feet got wet. And so just dealing with that. But the biggest thing I'm doing for preparation is knowing that I'm going to be less prepared going into Bigfoot than I was going into Tahoe, and just being okay with that. Because when I went into Tahoe, I had tapered properly. I was conditioned. I didn't have a 200-mile race on my legs already. So it's just
Yeah.
really spending a lot of time with my mind thinking that, I'm going to go out and do my best, just like I did at Tahoe, but my best at Bigfoot is probably going to be a slower pace, more pain, whatever. And I'm just going to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I mean, I know that's fair. You can't, period, recover that fast from a race like that and then run another one. So, I think that's a very realistic thing to take. And I think we often need to be like have that frame that like framing the realistic framing for our goals, especially when stuff happens that you can't control. Like
Mm-hmm.
the weather was epic this year in a way that you really can't compare. Like we had 900 plus inches of snow at one of the resorts here, and it's just
Yeah.
there's still snow. There was still snow at the stop of Speedgoat a week ago. Like it's a lot. So yeah, when you have stuff like that happen, making that reframing matters. Um, and something you said, oh, 20 minutes ago was like you have to have your way to get through the suffering and like have your why. And I have a feeling that especially in Bigfoot, that's probably going to come in a little more. So like, what is that for you? Like, what drives you to do these things? Because I mean, we can all admit they're a little crazy. Like it's kind of the
Sure.
sport. That's kind of why we do it. So like, what is the reason for it for you? And what do you think about when you're in that pain cave? Hey everyone, I've decided to stop doing ads for this podcast, at least for the time being. I just don't think they're a good use of anybody's time. So instead of that, I just have a simple ask. If you find this information valuable, please tell someone about it. Either hit the like or subscribe buttons on your preferred platform, share it with somebody, or you could even just head over to the trail and ultra running training group on Facebook, and I'd appreciate that as well. Just trying to make more good, free information for people so we can all get better at running on the trails. And if we can spread the tribe, that would be great. Thank you, and let's get to the podcast. What is the reason for it for you? And what do you think about when you're in that pain cave?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about me being sick, and in my family and in my circle, I had kind of become known as the sick guy. And around holidays, people would
Sure.
ask my wife, is Tony coming for Christmas? And she'd have to say, well, we'll just have to wait and see how he's feeling. And I didn't want to be known as that guy anymore. And that's why when I started walking, I found the marathon. I'm like, I want to be known as the guy that could run a marathon. That would be a good identity changer. And then once I ran a marathon, I'm like, you know what? I don't think that's my limits. And so I continuously search for my limits. And I know at some point I'll find them. I know at some point something's gonna, do me in and I'm gonna fail, but I fail all the time. You just keep failing forward.
Yeah, slowly.
So my why is, I've done a few of these 200-mile races now, and I want to be one of the few people that finish the Triple Crown. And I don't have to be the fastest finisher. I just want to be a finisher. And again, I think it goes back to the person that I was when I was really sick. I was still the same person. I still had all the same dreams and goals and desires to live happy, healthy, peaceful. But I was just in a situation where my body wouldn't allow me to. And now my body is allowing me to do some pretty crazy things. And I have two greatest fears outside of my family being taken care of and things like that, but personal fears. First one is that I will die with unrealized potential. Like, how sad will that be that I could have done better and I chose not to? And then the second fear I have is that I will wake up one day and my best days will be behind me. And that's going to happen to all of us, but I want to make sure that it happens to me as far out in the future as possible. So those are kind of my whys.
Makes sense. And I think we're all kind of driven by that because I think both of those things are at least somewhat guaranteed. And trying to minimize that differential to some degree, I think is a big driving factor it is for me, it's for most people I talk to, and
Yeah.
especially a lot of people in this space. Because I will say, like, that question is something I ask everyone before I agree to coach them. Because, like, I'm not the guy who is going to try to convince you that you need to run an ultra. That's just not me. I'll help you do it though, and you usually have to have a reason because it's going to be shitty at some point. It just is, and yeah, I think having that, I don't know, really poignant thing to think about when you're in that hole is important. So, like, when you're going through that pain cave, is that really kind of what goes through your head? Just like, this isn't my limit yet, like that kind of thought, or how does that drive?
Yeah, there was, just being totally raw with you, there were probably 4 times at Tahoe that I just wanted to quit. My feet hurt, I was tired, exhausted. I fell back in the pack, got in my head about I'm not going to have as good of a finish as I wanted. The hydration thing, I started letting that play with my mind a little bit. I'm like, I don't know if it was consciously or subconsciously, but I'm starting to think, well, I have this excuse in my back pocket now that, I've been on these medical holds at the aid stations. I could just say that I'm going to quit. But I think if going into these races, which I did, that there are going to be moments that you want to quit. And my deal with myself is that if I can take one more step, I will take one more step. And then I'll figure out what happens next. And so in that pain cave, when I want to quit, It's, can you take one more step? And if you can, then you do. And I had rationalized in my mind, I'm already this far into Tahoe. Just get through Tahoe, and you can make the decision to not do Bigfoot because it's only 2 weeks. It's not enough time. People will understand. So I had to really back down. Forget about Moab in October. Forget about Bigfoot, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. That's too big. Just worry about getting to the next aid station and moving your feet forward. And but again, just realizing that you're probably going to want to quit at least once, if not multiple times in the race, and just know that that's not reality talking to you. That's something's out of balance. You need more food, you need more sleep, you need something.
Yeah. And I think also you said something that really hit for me because, like, you were having rhabdo-esque. I mean, you had rhabdo, you just like got out of it. So you were having like some rhabdo issues, and there will often not just be a moment where you want to quit, but there will be a really good reason for you to do it.
Yeah.
And like when I ran an ultra last year, I sprained my ankle like mile 30. So I had like 20 to go. And it wasn't that bad. Like I've destroyed an ankle before. So it was like a very educated choice to finish. But knowing that, like I knew that at every aid station I could have easily pulled it and been like, everyone get it, your ankle's messed up. Um, yeah, you kind of have to realize that not only will you want to quit, you'll probably have a really good reason to quit.
Yeah. Yeah. You will have a sympathy card somehow that you can pull and say, I worked really hard, but I rolled the ankle, the aid station pulled me, this, whatever. And those excuses are out there if you want them, but you've got to know going into it, you're going to defend against it and not let your mind go there.
Absolutely. And like have the chat prior. Like I'm also not the like death before DNF guy. Like if you genuinely want a DNF, like great, let's go get an ice cream. But like you probably don't. So like
Yeah.
make those like standards before you get real tired. Because when you're really tired, the standards go out the window. So like have you, I don't know, training for a 200 takes a lot of time. I know you're an entrepreneur, like you run things. I'm sure you have a busy life as someone who also runs my own stuff. Like, how do you make it all fit? And this is the thing I thought we were talking about how you make it all fit on the trail in your head, but like, how do you make it all fit into your life as well? You said that like you weren't a huge fan of the like work-life balance concept, and I probably agree with you. But yeah, like how does it all fit?
Yeah. So, you hear the term work-life balance, and I think if you were to really if you were to really take that to heart, it means you're doing this 50% and this 50%, which means, you're failing at both. That's
Mm,
how I picture it. Now, whether somebody else sees it that same way, that's how I see it. So I think of it more like a pendulum where it swings back and forth. And so, I might be 90% focused on training and 10% focused on business and family. And then I stay there for 2, 3 days, and then it swings back the other way. And then I'm like, no, I'm not, Mondays are my rest days. So Mondays, no training. I might, I have some compression boots. I might sit in the compression boots for a little while, but and I want to focus on my diet a little bit. But outside of that, there's no training. And then on my short run days, I'm focusing more on the business or more on family. And so I really think you need to realize that you're constantly out of balance. But if you can swing back and forth fast enough, it kind of feels like balance.
I agree. And I feel like, yeah, specific, I mean, ultras are by definition kind of unbalanced, which is what they are. And I've heard this put a couple different ways that kind of click in my head. Like one is the difference between like balance and harmony. And
Mm.
then the other is like long-term balance, which like both of those kind of store in my head as the same. but it's like over the course of your life, we probably want some balance.
Sure.
But day to day, it just might not be there. Like this is probably a
Right.
15 to 16 hour workday for me so
Yep.
that I can do fun things tomorrow. And
Mhm.
grand scheme of things, great. But today I'm going to be really tired. And I think that's
Right.
kind of where that sits.
And like leading up to this Triple Crown, I put in a lot of time training. Um,
I bet.
after after I'm done with Bigfoot, I think I'm home for like 12 days or something. And then I'm taking my wife to Jamaica. And then we come back. And then in another month or so, then I'll do Moab. But
Awesome.
this is kind of my window. And then, after Moab is over mid-October, like then my training will settle down, my running will settle down through the first of the year. And then, I don't have anything registered on 2024. I've got some things that I'm in negotiation with the home life for, but uh, right now so I'm planning on this is my intense season, and then my next season will be more of a softer season.
I get that. And I think the season thing is important framing, at least it is for me. Like right now, I can't really run. I'm having asthma issues that due to whatever. I can't, and haven't seen a doctor and will see one in a week. But like it is running, it's been a really difficult thing. And so this is not necessarily a running season for me. This is like getting better at my job and getting stronger season. And like taking your life in those sections can be really helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at nutrition for you, like you have celiac, does that limit you while racing? Is this a thing that like is a struggle? Like what do you do for your nutrition strategy?
So there is some limiting factors to it. I also made a choice about 4 or 5 years ago that as I was working on cleaning up my diet, I became vegetarian too. And I know, I'm not trying to push that on anybody, but I was running a lot of early morning runs, and I was eating, like steaks late at night, and I would just feel crappy on my early mornings, before the sunrise or sunrise runs. And I was running with a guy, and he's like, well, you're just, you have too much in your digestive tract still, and your body is sending blood there to still try to digest it. And I don't know if this is actually accurate or not, what he was telling me, but at that moment, I'm like, all right, so fine. So not only do I have celiac, but I also, I'll eat eggs and cheese, but other than that, I would be vegan or vegetarian. And
Sure.
so when you're out on the trail, there is some challenges to you come into the aid station, and I think I mentioned these 200-mile aid stations have like, you roll in and they're like, what do you want? And they'll make you whatever. So, they're making cheeseburgers, they're making, burritos, goulash, bacon and eggs, like whatever. And they just make it up right there for you. Um, I think Phil said he ate 13 cheeseburgers uh, at Moab last year or something like that. Like, you know, you're just
Sure.
constantly, but for me, the celiac thing, I have to avoid the gluten. And so we pack a lot of our own food. I try to be really
Yeah.
self-sufficient, and then I'll let the aid station cook it up for me. And if not, then, you know, you can throw scrambled eggs and cheese and some potatoes on a plate, and I can pound that down and be pretty good to go.
That makes a ton of sense. Like I figured, I mean, you mentioned Tailwind, like that's friendly for
Yeah.
your issues as long as, I mean, it's friendly for most people as long as they digest dextrose well. So, yeah, man,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. Um, yeah, people just always ask about nutrition, and like to some degree, like for some people, it really does matter, and then for others, it's like just feed me. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever works for you. Yeah, I get it.
Well, I will
Um,
say, if you're looking at nutrition for the long races, a couple things to think about. We already pointed this out, and it's obvious, but you're running at a calorie deficit from the first moment you're on the trail. So I'm eating gels at the starting line. I'm eating
Like you
gels.
should be.
I have
Yeah.
a alarm going off on my watch every 20 minutes that tells me to eat. And I'll do that for as long as I can tolerate it. And then at some point I'm like,
Yeah.
that alarm just went off 2 minutes ago. But it didn't, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And and so just continuing to drip calories in. But then what I do is I don't sit at an aid station generally. Um, my strategy is to not sit at an aid station and eat a whole bunch of food. I have a strategy of zero unproductive time. So I can take whatever time I need. But if I'm not doing something that's productive, it's time to go. And
I
so
like that.
I I will eat some food there, but generally they have a way for you to take food with you. So I'd rather walk and eat and let the food digest over the next 45 minutes or an hour while I'm walking than eat a whole bunch of food at the aid station, take a whole bunch of time, and then feel like I need to run out of the aid station to make up for the time because your body hasn't digested that food yet. And I've seen a lot of people eat a lot at the aid station and then get sick, 2, 3, 4 miles out where they can't keep it in because they ran too fast on a full gut when they haven't been eating for a while. And so putting a whole bunch of food in at once causes some issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I like to compare it to like an IV strategy, like try to
Mm-hmm.
your drip mechanism. Yeah. So I like that a lot. And the zero unproductive time is a very well phrased way to put that. I think it's really smart. And then if we're looking at like so nutrition makes sense, gear, like what do you use for gear? Like what are some of your favorites? And then like what might be a consideration for something when you're out there for 3+ days that wouldn't be a consideration for even a like a 50 or 100 where you're out there for 12 or 24.
Mm-hmm. So Ultraspire makes a waist belt, waist lamp, and I love that. It comes with little batteries, and it's got a pouch in the back so you can keep a spare battery or two. But I'll run with a headlamp at night, and then just putting that waist lamp on there, it brightens up the trail. And the first night you're still okay, but the second night, third night, you're pretty wiped out. And so just have that bigger, wider cone from the belt,
Sure.
but also
So
the
do you use
headlamp.
both at the same time then?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Cool.
Yeah. Because if you're just wearing the belt, if you are looking for your confidence markers or your ribbons or whatever on the trail, if you're just using the belt, you kind of got to, pivot and put
Got
your
it.
hips
Okay.
towards something where,
Sure.
with the headlamp, it's, how just using a headlamp, you can just turn it wherever, and wherever you turn your head, it's lighting it up. But the waist lamp also is a lower, it shines the light at the lower um, elevation, I guess. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
it then casts the shadows differently, which allows you to really see the trail better. So when you're, a day or two or three in, um, you're making smarter choices for your footsteps.
Yeah, I think that's really underappreciated. And I like the both idea. I don't hear that very often from the like the ribbon perspective, but I experienced it on my own where I took my headlamp off and like held it at my waist. Because I was really worried about tripping for obvious reasons.
Mm.
But like if we're seeing even photos from I think Ultraspire like puts out where they compare the belt to the headlamp, like those
Mm-hmm.
shadows are unreal. Like it's
Yeah.
just so much safer. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And then as far as gear goes, um, I typically will take a filter bottle. I learned this in the Grand Canyon doing the rim to rim to rim. And I'm sure this is a popular saying, but this is the first time I saw it. You run from water, not to water. And so, you fill up when you have a chance, whether you think you need it or not. And I'd rather run into an aid station with a bladder that's half full than one that has been empty for 5 miles. So, I really try to make sure I have enough water. And
That
even
makes a
even when
ton
you
of
do
sense.
that,
The filter's a really good idea. Yeah.
yeah. even when you do that, sometimes you miscalculate how far it is from a freshwater source to, to the end, but it's better to fill up than not.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea. And I mean, I guess one question I'd have, since I'm not gonna talk to you between now and then, like Moab, like we're in a desert here. What do you do for that? Do you just have to carry more with you? Or okay.
Yes, typically I'll take a 2 liter bladder, two 500 milliliter bottles up front, and then two spare 500 milliliter bottles. And so with that, I'm carrying, 4 liters, and that will typically get you through the hottest sections. Now, in the
Sure.
night, I don't have to carry the extra spare bottles, so I can get away with three, but three is kind of the minimum at Moab for especially the first day.
Yeah, that makes, I mean, having spent a bunch of time out there, that makes sense. Like it's few and far between to get to water
Yeah.
sources in some of those spots. Absolutely. And as far as like shoes and packs and all that stuff, like anything specific that seems to be useful for these longer stuff?
The packs, Ultraspire makes a good distance pack. Solomon makes a good distance pack. I see those are probably the two primary brands that I see. You see Ultimate Direction a little bit more, but not so much anymore. It's usually just Ultraspire or Solomon. But you wind up carrying a ton of gear. The Destination Trail has a bunch of mandatory gear that they require that you carry, and they'll do spot checks. So like the first day at Tahoe, even though it was 100 degrees, we I had to carry a jacket with a hood. So I had a super lightweight puffy jacket with a hood, but and I probably could have left it in a drop bag and picked it up at some point, but mandatory gear is mandatory gear, and I'd hate to get pulled
Absolutely.
because I don't have it at an aid
Yep.
station, even though it's, at that time later in the day, it might be 85 or 90 degrees. You carry it because, I've seen racers not have gear and need it and really be in a bad spot because of it.
100%. It's safe and it's a really silly reason to DNF. So yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Cool. Well, a couple more questions for like coming end of time here, but I see that you run or seem to run like Chase the Moon pretty much every year. I know nothing
Yeah,
about that race. And if you run it that often, you clearly enjoy it. So I would love to hear about it.
sure. Um, the first time I ran it, it was the first time that I ran overnight. And
Oh,
so I was
cool.
like, well, this would be a good way to learn because Chase the Moon, it starts at 7 at night and runs till 7 in the morning.
Oh, sweet.
It's almost a 10-mile loop course. It's nine something. Um, and then, but your loops only count if you're back to the start line by the finish. And
Got it.
then at like, I don't know, 5:30 in the morning, because it goes 7 to 7 at like 5:30, they'll cut it down to a half loop. There's like a fire road you can take.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. The reason I run it a lot is really just for night training to be able to run. Um, it's funny, I don't actually like the race that much because it's these little rolling hills, and at night you can't
Yeah,
tell, you can't power up a hill for a while and then get a
sure.
nice long descent. It's just constantly rolling. So I use it more as training than like, let's go celebrate and run a race. So it
I'm actually
serves
really
its
glad I asked
purpose.
this. So do you feel like running a night race or doing some like runs at night is helpful for these longer events then? Is that a thing that seems to be really useful for you?
For sure. If you are
Cool.
going to be running at night in a race, absolutely you need to be doing some night runs.
Do you feel like
Primarily,
they need to be long then? Like, because you're doing one that's 12 hours more or less. But yeah, do you feel like they need to be pretty well overnight then?
the reason I like it is, typically it's on a Friday. So typically I'll get up normal time, 5, 6 in the morning, and get some work done usually in the day, and then I'll start kind of relaxing around 2 or 3. But I'm up the whole time. I'm awake, and so it helps me run at night, but also run a little bit fatigued.
Sure.
and helps me just know what it's like to be, suffering when you're already, coming up on, 20, 22, 24 hours awake. And the other thing, so I don't think they have to be long, but you definitely get something out of doing a, at least a 5 or 6 hour long run at night. The other
Yeah.
thing is people, I I guess I spend enough time out in the woods that I don't really, there's not a lot that will spook me or, I mean, there's really
Yeah.
only one animal out here that I think that would take me down, and that's a mountain lion. And
Same.
I've only seen one. I can't tell you how many have seen me, but I've only seen one.
More
And
than one. Yeah.
yeah. And if it wants to take you, it's going to take you. There's not much you can do about it. But
Yeah,
they
man.
generally don't.
They're cool and terrifying, but yeah, there's nothing you can do. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people that get spooked at night, and they don't discover how afraid they are until they're out in a race. And to me, that'd be something that's an unknown that would be pretty crappy to deal with, where you're already tired and now you hear things in the bushes, or you see a pair of eyes somewhere that reflect off of your headlamp, and now all of a sudden you're freaking out on top of being tired and sore and cold and hungry and all of that. So
Yeah.
I definitely would recommend getting in some night runs just to be familiar with it, because I actually think it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite parts of these long distance races, is because it cools down and I can typically pick up my pace a little bit, and other runners tend to slow down. So it's a chance to pick up some ground.
Love that. Cool, man.
So,
Yeah, I'm really glad I asked that because that
yeah.
led to something I know people wondered about with the night stuff. So cool. And then I guess my last question or comments, these are from the group that I like run online. Couple things. Joel Cervantes says, hey. He says he met you at like Moab
Oh
a
yeah.
couple years ago. Says hi.
Yeah. Joe's a
Phil
solid
Clark.
dude.
Joe's a solid dude. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Joel is like he's about to run 100 at Loopy Looper tomorrow. So yeah, we'll
Cool.
see how it's going to go great. And Phil Clark asked me to tell you not to fart as you pass him and your next 200.
No
And
guarantees. No guarantees.
and then Scott Hundred Mark wants to know, would you ever do another 200-ish again? I'm going to say he means like after the triple. So like kind of what's in your future plans. And he also, we talked about this a little bit, but wants to know what your recovery looks like and if it's different from recovering from 100. That's the part we didn't really dive into too much. And yeah.
Yeah. So will I ever do a 200 again after the Triple Crown? Absolutely. Absolutely. I will. It's an adventure, and it's a different sport than running a 50 miler or a 100 miler. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's harder. If you can suffer well, then it's like you can almost train for a 200 by using your same training you would train for a 100.
Interesting. Okay.
You're going to go slower. You're going to have more time on feet, but the 200-mile distance, it's a different sport, but it's not twice as hard. Like I think going from a 50 to 100 is harder than going from 100 to a 200.
Interesting. Because I've heard not that. So that's really cool to like hear that
Yeah.
perspective. Cool.
Well, I
Yeah.
will tell you, you and I have not talked a lot about the different training methods, but for these 200s, I do a lot of heart rate training.
Sweet.
I keep my heart rate in a race. I'm 53, and in a race, I try to keep it around 131, 132, and
So
bumping
do you
up
have
to
any idea like
136.
what your max heart rate is?
I went and had all that tested. I don't remember, just because I don't ever
That's
I don't ever
fine. It's
get
just
there.
like because I mean that's kind of how you end up determining that, right? So like that's
Yeah.
actually my biggest gripe with heart rate training is like if you're not going to do a max test, it's useless. Otherwise, it's great. It's really
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I went and did the treadmill training with the VO2 max and the lactic
Oh,
and
bud.
lactic
Yeah.
threshold and all that stuff.
It's a rough
But
time.
anyway,
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And then the last part of that question was, what's my recovery like? I think.
Sorry for the pause. Yes, the last part of
Yeah.
that question was like, what is your recovery and how is it different from maybe a 100?
One of the things that, and I'm still trying to research this because it's happened to me after every 200. It happened to me after one of my 100s, but I get really bad night sweats afterwards.
Interesting. Okay.
And to the point where like I'm serious, like even sleeping on a towel will soak the mattress. Like, I mean, these are
Okay.
bad sweats. And I'm still trying to
Okay.
research, it's obviously it's a chemical imbalance. Your body's still trying to recover. It's still trying to get rid of toxins that you've built up by breaking down muscle. But
Hmm.
that was something that I had no idea happened. And the more I talk to people that do these 200s, the more I find out that I'm not that unique in it. That there
Really
are,
cool.
yeah,
Okay.
that it's your body's way of trying to flush and recover. um so now that I've
I'm
learned that
fascinated
it's,
by that.
yeah, it's more common than what I thought I was just this oddball. So now what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, now that it's common, how do we combat it, or do we not want to combat it? Like, if you were able to make yourself not sweat, are you doing more harm than good? Like, do you need to sweat all this stuff out?
The question I'd have, and I'd also wonder if it has anything to do with like some like cortisol imbalance. I mean, you're obviously just like cranking cortisol for days. It's not supposed
Yeah.
to do that. So like, um, I know after this guy coach nutrition a little while ago, he summited Everest, and after he got back down, like his cortisol curve was just messed up for a
Mm.
while. I'd kind of wonder if it has a similar kind of thing going on there. I'm not an endocrinologist, so that's not the question for me. It's just like the first
Yeah.
thing my brain goes to. But interesting. So, how long? I'm fascinated by this. I've never heard this before from anybody. So, how long is the night sweat thing happening to you then?
A good week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, does that mess up your sleep too? Like,
You're not when you come back from a race like this, and you even if you were to do
sure,
nothing but like if you didn't have to work the next week, you're going to try to sleep a lot, but you're not really getting good quality sleep. You're
sure,
tossing and turning, your legs are jumping, you're sore, um even if you sleep, you're not getting good deep sleep or REM sleep. It's just your body is building its building blocks back, a little at a time. And so it does affect your sleep, but on one hand, when your body's ready to just reset, it just does, just like on the side of the trail. And other
yeah,
times, like I've got nothing going on. It's 9 o'clock. I've turned the lights off. I got a nice fan going, like totally quiet. And you lay down and your body's like, no, not now. We're not sleeping right now. So
sure,
I really don't
yeah,
know
that makes sense.
how to solve it.
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, you're doing stuff humans weren't really made to do. Like, I mean, we're supposed to go for long distances, but probably not quite that intense for that long.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm sure there's like just some dysregulation that's supposed to happen, man. Like, that's probably a factor. Um, so, yeah, I'd be curious to see. Like, do you ever try to take melatonin or anything like that? Like, push that? Like, I'm just kind of, and this is me largely just kind of following up for Scott, if the biggest difference is like you're just kind of this messed up after a 200, if you've done anything different to fix it faster.
I haven't. The only thing that I've really done, I've really tried to rest. I've really tried to elevate my legs. I
Mm,
still continue to drink Tailwind for that next week, getting
sure.
those electrolytes in, getting a little extra calories in. Um, but that's an area that I certainly have not even come close to mastering, is the recovery, because it's just
Fair.
your body's just shot, and I just am not smart enough to figure out how to make it recover faster. It does eventually recover, and it doesn't takes a couple weeks,
Yeah, I
but
mean, I'll be honest, man, I'm not sure it's a thing necessarily that's there. I mean, even if you look at Michael McKnight, like I realize he won the Triple Crown forever ago. And then like the next 2 years, like for someone as good as him, weren't great from a like race results perspective.
Mhm.
And I honestly think if you just push yourself that hard, maybe you end up in a little bit of cortisol dysfunction and tired for a while. Like that might actually be the answer. There might be a way to expedite it, but I don't know if we know that yet. So I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Tony. I know we kind of ran over what I expected. I didn't even realize what time it was. Do you have anything else you want to say before we head out?
No, I just, I guess I'd wrap up with, if you are interested or intrigued by the longer distances, like I said before, I think it's harder to go. And I know you got some different feedback on this, but my personal experience was it was harder to go from a 50 miler to a 100 miler than it was to go from a 100 to a 200. And the 200s are epic adventures. You know, I can't say how all the races are run, but the destination trail races are run really well. A lot of volunteers, a lot of medical staff, and it's just each one of them is an adventure of a lifetime. And I'm excited to be able to knock out the next 2 races here of the Triple Crown, and be able to say that that's something that I was able to accomplish, even after being the sick guy and even after being 53 years old.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. Tony, again, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm looking forward to following up with you as like over the next couple of months. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks for
Cool.
having me on.
Yeah, of course. Everybody, we'll be back with another one of these soon. Tony, hang out, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.